All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we are going to be continuing this segment of Tafseer that we were doing, and it is relating. Why did I forget the Quran right there? Let me get that. That is relating the ayat in Surah Al-Ma'idah, and that was ayah number 95. So we were talking about those ayat, and we were talking about the fidya, or at least the kafara, not a fidya, but the kafara, when, of course, the person that is in a state of ihram going for Hajj or Umrah, if they were to hunt, what would be the kafara or the expiation for that? So we went in some details, but then we left off at point number 11, and we basically talked about before. Let's look at that. We talked about the if a person were to hunt, what they're not allowed to hunt, what they're not allowed to do, whether it's breaking down trees and so forth. So we talked about that. Right now, let's see. What if what if they had actually, what this person that is in a state of ihram, they basically had committed this transgression, which basically here is hunting. And what if they actually did it more than once? Right? So what does that mean? Do they have to do more than one expiation, or is it basically done once on behalf of all the time? So it's each and every single time that they had hunted something, that would be a specific expiation. So would it be one expiation for the numerous times that this person had done that hunting for? Let's see right there. And certainly same thing if we're speaking about يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقتلوا الصيد وأنتم حرم ومن قتله منكم متعمدا فجزاء مثل ما قتل من النعم. So, of course, this is to basically say that the forbiddance of hunting is basically here considered as a continuous rule that one is not supposed to be doing. Therefore, if one were to transgress the limit, that means they had committed more than one transgression, deserving more than one expiation. And if the person were to exceed the limit and perhaps do it more than once, or probably not even care about the ruling, that's how this ayah would direct وَمَنْ عَادَ فَيَنْتَقِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْهُ. So, in other words, the scholars that considered that this piece within the ayah, let's say right there, this ayah said لا تقتلوا الصيد وأنتم حرم, okay? ومن قتله منكم فجزاء مثل ما قتل من النعم. And then ومن عاد. So some scholars understood it that this is saying, O you who believe, do not kill basically whatever you had hunted while you are in a state of ihram. If you were to do that and you were to purposely hunt and purposely kill whatever you hunted, then this would be the expiation. So the scholars then debated when this portion of the ayah, and whoever goes back to such a habit or such a practice, then those are the people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically retaliate from. Okay, those are the people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So scholars debated whether this threat was going to the person that had done it once, or whether this threat is if a person had been, I guess, reckless about the ruling and had done it a couple times. Okay, so I'm just letting you, I guess, be aware of what we're talking about here. Let's see, point number 12. فَجَزَاءٌ مِثْلَ مَا قَتَلَ. Go ahead, Noura.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you saw my question in the chat, but
Oh,
yeah, I was just curious if that person like tried to hunt the animal, but like maybe like wounded it and it got away, like what that would be.
okay. So they would be at sin for even attempting to hunt, but as long as it didn't get killed, no expiation is due. Okay?
Oh, Jazakallah khair.
Right. الجزاء إنما يجب بقتل الصيد لا بنفس أخذه. So this is the point. He said at point number 13 that the الجزاء, meaning the expiation here. الجزاء here is to mean not a reward, but this is actually talking about an expiation. So the expiation would be due upon or in circumstances when the person had officially killed whatever he had hunted, and not necessarily in just probably maybe grabbing it, maybe wounding it, but this is actually talking about completely killing it, which is why this ayah right there says وَمَنْ قَتَلَهُ مِنْكُمْ. So the word is whoever kills that side, whoever kills that animal that they had hunted. So it's not wounding it, it's completely killing it. Okay? But they are at sin for attempting to transgress the limit. Okay, so when we're speaking about perhaps maybe a bird, maybe gas taking away its feathers, or probably they caught a bird and probably put it in a cage, and maybe the feathers fell off or something like that, then in that situation there would be no expiation to pay. Same thing if they were perhaps to maybe wound an animal, maybe amputate a leg, some extremity right there, but the actual life is still safe, the actual life of that animal was not harmed, then in that situation, فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ, then they would have no expiation due to pay. And in some scholars actually said, let's look at this one, قِيل. When you look at the word قِيل, that means that it was said, and some scholars had considered that if they were to wound an animal, then the responsibility would be to pay the expiation in the amount that they had basically defected that animal. So you could say that this is an opinion. In other words, certainly in situation when if you were to kill the animal, then that's going to be the expiation where you would find another animal of na'am in order to make that equivalent value. And then you're going to use that value, you're going to slaughter that animal, you're going to distribute the meat to the people around the Kaaba, to the people within Mecca, basically to benefit from. And you're not going to be waiting till you get to your home country. You're not going to send it to the Horn of Africa, but you're going to distribute it within Mecca. Okay, so some scholars actually said, well, if it's a life for a life, that would mean if we're speaking about parts of an animal, then in that situation, this person would get something that is equivalent. So we're not going to say, okay, does that mean I'm going to amputate a leg of probably a sheep and distribute it? The answer is no, but we're speaking about something, according to that opinion, we're speaking about an equivalent pricing. We're speaking about an equivalent amount in order to basically do an expiation, in other words, partition and expiation. Okay, let's see point number 14. And what if we're talking about perhaps different animals, whether we're speaking about الدواب and الطير. What's the difference between دواب and طير? So الدابة is any animal or any creature that basically walks on land. الطير is any animal that basically flies. So we're talking about birds. Okay, so in that situation, if we're speaking about a bird, then the question is, since this ayah is saying فَجَزَاءٌ مِثْلُ مَا قَتَلَ مِنَ النَّعَمِ, then this ayah is saying, well, then the expiation would be of something that is equivalent in structure, equivalent in, I guess the species would be similar to that. But the question is, of course, you're not going to be looking at a bird and comparing it to a cow or comparing it to probably a sheep, because that's completely different. So that's the question that they basically said and wanted to discuss. Well, how do we understand what is equivalent to a bird compared to the na'am itself? And that's that area. Do we consider the structure? Do we consider it's probably the way that it was created? In other words, are we looking at structure? Are we looking at the value? What are we really looking at? Because it's so easy to talk about a zebra and compare it perhaps to perhaps a cow, or perhaps look at a deer and compare it to a goat. It's so easy to see that. But then when you're talking about perhaps a pigeon, am I going to compare it with a camel, or I'm going to compare it with a goat, or whatever is from Inam? So that's that area of discussion. I'm not going to go in details with that, but I would say that, just to let you know that, for example, in Maliki considered, well, what we would consider the least amount of hadi. What is il-hadi? Il-hadi is basically an animal that is slaughtered during Hajj or Umrah. So he said, well, the least amount is going to be what would be considered as part of a na'am. So in other words, you're going to slaughter one of those, and whether we're speaking about a mutton or whether we're speaking about a camel that reached the age of 1 or 2, so we're looking at different areas. Or if the amount was not equivalent, let's say this person probably killed a pigeon. I don't know, they just killed a pigeon in Mecca. So what does that mean? What expiation should they be giving? So in that situation, well, you can choose the option of finding an equivalent animal from a na'am to distribute, or you do have the other option, which is to distribute food to the poor people, or the third option is basically an equivalent amount of days to do the fasting. Okay, so that's for those times when we don't really have an equivalent, let's say, animal that probably is equivalent to the pricing, to the value, to the structure, etc. So that's one opinion right there. So just to keep that one. So look at this one in where Malik said, في الحمامة منه شاة اتباعا للسلف. If a person were to hunt down a pigeon, then what they have to pay in expiation is going to be a share, which basically is going to be a goat. It's going to be a goat. So just really skip really fast right there. Abu Hanifa considered, well, no, what we're going to go for is not necessarily the structure for that animal, but we're going to look at the value of it, regardless of the structure. Because in that situation, we would look at that animal that was hunted, and in the place that it was hunted in, what is the value? What is the value that this animal is sold in? And then we would buy with the amount of money that this value, that the value of that hunt was sold within that area. And then we would buy food with that amount of money, that equivalent amount of money, and basically feed it to the poor, and give basically whether we're giving them perhaps wheat or barley or dates or whatever food, then this is the expiation for it. Let's see for Shafi'i. Shafi'i considered that no, it's not an issue. It's not an issue of having an equivalent creature that you're going to be basically right there slaughtering in terms of that value, but you're going to basically evaluate. You're going to evaluate what you had destroyed, basically whatever damage that you had done, and you're going to consider the evaluation equivalent to the amount that you had destroyed. So we're not looking at the equivalent value of whatever animal that you had killed, but we're going to look at the destruction, or at least المتلفات, meaning whatever that was killed or whatever destruction that you had done. We're going to look at the pricing of that and the value of that, and then we're going to consider what is equivalent to that. You're going to distribute that amount of money, or at least the food, distribute it on to the people that are in need in Mecca. Okay, I don't want to go in details of all their evidences and how they debated all of that just because of time. Let's see. But I guess it's just to let you know, in the future, if you went hunting, make sure you don't do that while you're in a state of ihram, and just know that there is an expiation to pay and a consideration of certain rulings, just to let you know. Okay, what if a person basically ahrama min Mecca? They basically did their ihram from Mecca, but then they closed the door on perhaps their pigeons, their animals, and then left. Well, they didn't mean to hunt, but they thought that they had left enough food and water for the animals within their barn, or within, I guess, their den, or whatever, that they had within their ranch, or whatever it is. But then to come back and say that the food was scarce, or they had closed the barn, they didn't have the ability to go and hunt on their own, so they basically all died. Does that mean that we're going to consider that this person is responsible for the death of these animals, and therefore they're going to pay the expiation for these animals? We're not talking about somewhere in Africa. We're talking about right there. This person, in other words, is within Mecca or within Medina, and they had left their ranch. And of course, Medina is haram and Mecca is haram. So in other words, it's within the premise of what is considered al-haram. In other words, the area of sanctity, and therefore you could not slaughter or kill animals. Will you really be held accountable for each and every single one of these pigeons, for each and every single one of, perhaps even if it's a baby chick, even if it's a baby chicken, for example? Well, chickens are not included, but we're talking about perhaps baby, we're talking about, well, al-hamam are not considered domesticated, or some are. Okay. So in that situation, what do we consider? Do we basically just consider, well, the value of, let's say, these maybe 20 or 30 pigeons is equivalent to the value of perhaps a jafra, which basically would mean a female goat? Or is it going to be with a female camel? And what are we really looking at? So just wanted to let you know, all these differences of opinions in that regard. So I'm just going to try to skip as much as I can. I wanted to read this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, if في الضبع إذا أصابه المحرم كبش وفي الظبي شاء وفي الأرنب عناق وفي اليربوع جفرة، قال والجفرة التي قد أرتعت. قلت في طريق آخر، قلت لأبي الزبير وما الجفرة؟ قال التي قد فطمت ورعت. But I want you to look at this hadith. Let me first explain what this is. في الضبع إذا أصابه المحرم كبش. If a person that is in a state of ihram were to hunt down a hyena, then what they have to pay, at least in expiation, is going to be a ram. And if they were to hunt a doe or a deer, then what would be equivalent would be a sheep. And if they were to hunt down a rabbit, then that would be a camel. And if they were to hunt down a jerboa, that would be equivalent to a female goat. I don't know what the female goat is called, but okay. And of course, I want you to just look at that. But one thing is that this is, let's say here, وصحيح أنه موقوف على عمر. This is what I want you to focus on. That is this necessarily the Prophet ﷺ saying? The answer is no. He said what is actually more authentic is that although it said وروى أبو الزبير عن جابر عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, that Abu Zubayr had narrated upon Jabir that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم had said the quote that I had just mentioned. But here you could see in the footnote, after reviewing this, he basically said al-Bayhaqi, who's actually a Shafi'i madhab, but regardless, he's also a scholar of hadith. He said, وَصَحِحُ أَنَّهُ مَوْقُوفٌ عَلَى عُمَرٍ. What is actually more accurate is that مَوْقُوفٌ عَلَى عُمَرٍ actually means that this was a statement in a report done by Umar ibn al-Khattab and not necessarily a statement said by the Prophet ﷺ himself. Just wanted you to just realize at least how we, not necessarily because it said عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, etc., it doesn't necessarily make it a hadith. So in other words, according to al-Bayhaqi, this is an athar. Al-athar is different than a hadith because al-hadith is what was quoted upon the Prophet ﷺ and basically attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, and al-athar would be a quote that was done by a sahabi. And we definitely have books. We definitely have books like Musannaf Abdul Razzaq, Musannaf Ibn Abi Shayba, and they're actually really huge. We're looking at almost 23 volumes each. Okay, and you could also find some athar as well in al-Bukhari. You can find some athar in al-Muwatta. You'll find some athar in different other books, of course, that contain these athar. Do we do the same research to the athar that we would do to the quotes of hadith? The answer is yes, you can. But would it have the same weight if it was authentic? The answer is no, absolutely not. It would not have the same weight, but it would actually be, or at least qawl al-sahabi, it would definitely be an aiding resource to see and to scrutinize whether this is actually coming from knowledge that the sahabi had taken off the Prophet ﷺ, or is this their personal opinion. Then we would scrutinize that to see whether other Sahaba had probably quoted something similar and where is this really coming from. So I'm just going to skip all of that and let's see, I'm just wanting to, let's look into this point, بيض النعامة. So we're looking at an ostrich egg. What are we looking at? What if the person were to take an ostrich egg, they found it and they're like, whoa, look what I found. They basically took it there, wanted to carry it, but then of course they drop it and here it is, now it's gone. Okay, I know that I just made this all this up right now. Okay, so what if they were to do that? Does that mean they would have to pay the expiation of probably a goat or a sheep? Or is this going to be that, no, we're going to look whether there was a baby ostrich inside that probably came out after it was broken. If it basically comes out and it's making quack quack sound, or I don't know what an ostrich would sound like, but what are we looking at? And are we talking about that? No, we would look at two, I guess, adlain. We're talking about perhaps experts saying, well, this is the amount that you would have to pay in expiation. All right, so just wanted to note that. And let's see, كعب بن عجرة أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قضى في بيض نعام أصابه محرم بقدر ثمنه. Let's look at this one, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, okay, let's look at this hadith right there. We're going to get to the footnote that the Prophet ﷺ had basically considered and ruled that if a person were to harm an ostrich egg, of course, if the person is in a state of ihram, based on the equivalence of its price. So we're looking at the value, the price of it. You know, some experts would say, well, this is how much this would cost. Therefore, you would take the amount and probably distribute it off poor people and so forth. So this is, I guess, just leaving it right there. So in another quote, the Prophet ﷺ said, في كل بيضة نعام صيام يوم. For every single ostrich egg that a person might probably harm, that it would be equivalent to fasting 1 day or feeding one per person. But let's look at quote number 5, which basically had considered that an ostrich egg would be equivalent to the value of that egg. And the second opinion is, or the second quote, is that it would basically be fasting a day or perhaps feeding poor people. Let's look at number 5, quote number 5 and quote number 6, and really see what the author is saying. So according to the quote that was saying that it would be, we would look into what is equivalent of it. Let's see. قيل فيه ما هو شر من الكذب. So basically, there's one narrator that was known to being a liar. Okay, let's see right there. Ibn al-Qattan basically said in terms of that chain of narration that there's a person that was famous for what is called tadlis. What is tadlis? A tadlis is a form of speech that one might do, making you look into the words. And what's the best way that I could explain this? Maybe I can give an example and then probably and then probably explain it. So let's say I would say, did you know that Umar Sulaiman said this and this? Now, you would think that it was a personal conversation or that I had met with Umar Sulaiman and he told me this personally. Okay. And when I probably didn't tell you that it wasn't that I had met with this person and he told me this information, it's that someone else met him and basically told him such information, and then this person passed it to me, but I skipped one person that is within our chain of narration. This is just an example. So this is right there. There's tadlis basically of the narrators. And there's also another type of tadlis where you might ask me, so what did you get? I would tell you, oh, I got all the good things. And you understood that I got all the good things, meaning I got all the candies. But what I meant by all the good things that I want. All right, so that's a form of tadlis. It's a form of tawriya, sorry, not tarbiya, tawriya. Okay, so let's see. And what was what one of these chain of narrators, you could see that scholars basically wanted to debate whether this person was necessarily accused of basically being a liar, or whether there is another narrator that was known to committing what is called tadlis, but he himself is actually an honest person. Let's look at the second chain of narration, or at least the second hadith, that basically said what? That basically said that for every ostrich egg that we would fast a day or feed a poor person. Let's see, he said, لَيْسَ بِصَحِيحٍ عِنْدِي. That there's a certain narrator, Abu Hatim, had said that there's this narrator that is not authentic within that chain of narration, and therefore, let's say Abd al-Haq fil Ahkam, he basically said this hadith لا يسند من وجه صحيح. We don't have an authentic chain of narration for this hadith, and therefore that this hadith is not necessarily authentic. But of course, at the end, what are we going to consider? I didn't really research this I guess this debate and the fiqh issue, so I don't really know what the preponderant ruling in that regards is. In regards to an ostrich egg, I didn't research it, so excuse my ignorance in terms of that, and therefore I cannot really tell you what the preponderant ruling is. So I would say, please consult your local imam or your local scholar who researched this question, and I would love to hear what they were telling you. Okay, let's point number 18. يحكم به ذوى عدل منكم. يحكم به ذوى عدل منكم. So what are we looking at here? We're talking about if the person were just to kill basically whatever they hunted, and it would be to pay the equivalent of what was min al-na'am, but who's going to judge what makes something equivalent? Who's going to judge whether this is equivalent or not? Is it me or is it who? So the word dhawa actually means two. Adl means we're speaking about il-adala. There is a number of different levels of adala. Okay? We can say al-adala in general is to mean a person that has piety, a person that is honest, a person that might have ilm on that issue. That would be al-adala. A general adala is that it's a Muslim. This person is a Muslim. This person is basically not having any signs of being a liar. That's al-adl. Every Muslim is supposed to be adl unless proven otherwise. Okay? The other level of adala is that if we're speaking about probably we're looking for someone that is to teach us about hadith, teach us about Islam, then in that situation, we need them qualified within that area of expertise. Then in that situation, what actually makes a just or a fair or an let's say a qualified person to judge what is equivalent to this side, what is equivalent to this hunting thing that we had done. I wanted to actually read the story to you because let's read it first. Muhammad ibn Sirin had narrated a story. A man comes to Umar ibn al-Khattab and he said, my friend and I, we basically went in, I guess, racing on horses, and then we basically hit a doe or a deer, and while we were in a state of ihram, what do you think we should do? So Umar ibn al-Khattab basically had a man next to him, and he said, let's rule on this, you and I. And then they basically said he's supposed to be basically, or they are supposed to be basically, I guess, slaughtering a goat, not a sheep, but a goat. And then the man went off and he said, "This is Amir al-Mu'mineen." In other words, he's basically the highest official in the government, and he couldn't even rule on what would be a fair rule in a situation where we had actually killed a deer. And what he was insinuating is that, if you can't even rule on something simple like that, why should we even put you as a qualified ruler to rule on other things? That's what he was insinuating. So Umar ibn al-Khattab hears what the man had said, whether it's news coming to him or whether it's, the news spreading, etc., that this is what he commented. So Umar ibn al-Khattab brings him over. It's like, hey, we've got something to talk about right there. Did you read Surah al-Ma'idah? And he said, no. He said, did you know this man that ruled with me? Do you know who he is? He said, no. He said, if you had told me that you had read Surah al-Ma'idah, I would have actually flogged you for it. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did you not read the ayah that said, يَحْكُمُ بِهِ ذَوَا عَدْلٍ مِّنْكُمْ? That the one to rule in regards to such a transgression is to have two people. And he said, this man that I had included in this ruling is actually Abdurrahman ibn Auf. Just an idea. Abdurrahman ibn Auf is basically one of the people promised Jannah. Abdurrahman ibn Auf was one of the fuqaha al-Sahaba as well. So this isn't just anybody that is random. This isn't any random man. And even if you had the ilm, it's basically here telling you that no, it's not enough for you to do the ilm, but you also have to get another person to give you that evaluation. Now, this is important. This is to also teach us, no matter how scholarly and how good your research and how qualified you are, it is important to consider that sometimes, and of course, in this area, this is basically saying that no, in this situation, you have to have another scholar or another expert judging in terms of what would make a fair expiation. But if we're talking about al-ibra bi'umum al-lafzi la bikhusus al-sabab, if we're talking about that the theme is not necessarily exclusive to whatever situation that we have, but this is also teaching us that no matter how far your ilm had probably expanded to, and no matter what kind of an expert you are, it's important to learn from other areas of expertise. It's important to participate other experts with different fields. If, for example, you're a scholar in fiqh and you got a medical issue that needs to be researched, that needs some medical expertise to basically help you come about with this ruling that relates to this, well, you got to ask the experts in this field. If we're talking about perhaps banking, we're talking about transactions, we're talking about economy, we're talking about politics, we're talking about governance, etc. And that's why it's important to include the different specialists to govern not only on matters as small as hunting, but as probably big as governing on a complete country or probably in a society, etc., to have experts that are also included within such governance is to teach us the adab, is to teach us how to have that humility and how to be humble, and certainly how to learn how to ask others. Even if you may see yourself as an expert, you've got a degree, no, learn how to say, I don't know. Can you teach me? Can you tell me more about this? Hey, maybe I need to research this matter. I'm really not aware of this. This is basically part of adab and talab al-ilm. Adab, talab al-ilm. Okay, let's see. What if we had two experts basically rule that this deer is equivalent to, let's say, that goat? Then in that situation, لزم الحكم. What is لزم الحكم? خلاص. You cannot say, well, no, I'm thinking that this is not equivalent. I'm not sure it's accurate. خلاص. Once you had two hakam, two people that were qualified equivalent to give you the equivalent ruling for it. Don't keep on searching. Don't keep on going. That's the same thing. If we're speaking about maybe, let's say, maybe a dispute between a husband and a wife, or probably a dispute between two people over some kind of a disagreement on money, etc. If you go and you accept someone that is qualified to research, to judge between you, that's it. You're gonna have to take it. You can't say, well, I didn't like what he said. I think what he said was too misogynist, and no, I heard something else one time in a class and I listened. I know that that's not accurate. I actually went to some book in fiqh and it said other than what he had said, etc. Then this is going to be endless. At one point, whether you like that final ruling or not, at one point we have to accept that if you are to go to this person to rule between you, that's going to be final, and not necessarily that this person is supposed to rule in your favor. Okay. Let's see, what time is it? How many points do we still have? Hold on. Just going to see where. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll end it right here, and inshallah, we'll continue. Is it tomorrow? Yeah, we'll continue inshallah tomorrow. Oh, tomorrow we have pearls again. Yeah, tomorrow we have pearls again. So inshallah, we'll continue, I guess, on the day after tomorrow, and hopefully, inshallah, discuss more details in regards to this ayah. And you could see we're actually getting close to finishing this ayah really soon and going into the following ayah. So stay tuned, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. All right, what I'll do, I'll stop the recording.